Hey, what's happening, guys? Today, let's talk about radio. Where it came from, the early days of radio, and then let's build a simple radio transmitter. Alright? So our topic is radio, and it is generally accepted that it was invented in the 1890s by Marconi. My PCB pen is failing. Hold on a minute. Okay. It's generally accepted that Marconi invented radio, air quotes, invented, but it was a process that took a long time to really build up. And it probably started in the 1820s by a guy named Oersted. And then we had Lodge and Chandra Bose, who did some experiments, but they felt that it wasn't practical. There was no real use for radio. So it really wasn't until Marconi, again, yep, who was working off of James Maxwell theories of electromagnetism, kind of stumbled onto the fact that you can transmit electromagnetic waves with a spark gap. Now, that is also kind of misleading. The spark gap doesn't transmit the electromagnetic wave, it merely excites the tank circuit. And a tank circuit is simply either an RC or an LC circuit that oscillates. So we now have our number one basic part of the radio. Oscillator is an oscillator. So we need an oscillator. Then we're going to need a power source. And the most important part of any transmitter or receiver or transceiver is the antenna system. You can have the most powerful transmitter in the world, but if you don't have an antenna system, you're not going to get anywhere. So, let's talk about building a simple radio circuit, and we're going to break it down into two parts. We're going to have part one is our carrier, and part two is our modulation. Alright, so let's start with the carrier. Alright, using my scanning electron graph paper, we can show you the ether. That's it. So we have space and time. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our carrier, which is simply going to be a wave. Sine wave, square wave. At this part, it really doesn't matter, but we need to have a carrier. So the only thing we need for a carrier is an oscillator. It is going to give us a steady frequency that we can put our modulation on. Now remember this is the key. Modulation equals information. So we are going to take our carrier wave and we're going to modulate it. We are going to do this in AM amplitude modulation, because it's the simplest, which means we're going to take our carrier wave and we're going to superimpose some information on it. And what that's going to cause to happen is the modulation of our waves are going to change. The frequency will remain the same, but the amplitude of our waves is different. You see the difference between those two? By doing that, we can put information on top of our carrier. We can modulate our carrier. Alright. Now, before we start messing around with radio waves, if you're in the United States, the FCC, the Federal Communications Corporation, Federal Communications, something, whatever the FCC is, the governing body that controls the airways in the United States, is very particular about what you put onto their airways. What we're going to be doing here is extremely low power. It's probably not going to have enough power to get outside of my house. So we're not going to be violating any rules. Plus, I have an amateur radio license, so I'm allowed to do this. But before you do this, you need to check into your local laws, because I don't want you breaking any laws and getting in trouble. Now, there are 14,526,422 different ways to create an oscillator. We're simply going to use this crystal oscillator IC that we have here, and it is at 28.224 megahertz. 28.224 megahertz is in the 10 meter amateur radio band, so what we're doing here is mostly legal. Alright, so we have our oscillator. We're going to put a voltage into the oscillator, and we're going to get out a waveform. If I can find my batteries. There we go. We're using AA batteries here. Just check the voltage on this. This is a neat little meter. This is a Zotec ZTM0. It's a smart meter. Oops, sorry about that. I generally don't like smart meters, but I'm just playing around with this one. So if we just put it in auto, we'll get our probes here. Should get about, what, 6.5 volts? Yep, 6.5 volts. Alright, so our pins here, the upper left pin is our VCC, the lower right pin is ground, the lower left pin is not used, and the upper right pin is our output. Yep, plug in our ground first. And then our VCC. We will connect up a scope. Oops. There we go. And if you look there, you can see we have a ugly square wave, but that's just the way I'm probing, the way it's set up. It probably looks much better than that. And our frequency is 28.2238 megahertz. And what are we? So we are at 5 volts. Can't be right yet. Yep. What's our peak to peak here? 12 volts. Okay, it's odd. Alright. So there we go. We now have our carrier. But that's really pretty useless. If we tune the radio to 28.224 megahertz, which I'm not going to do right now for the carrier, you would just hear basically silence. If this is off, you would get a little bit of static. with it on, you hear nothing but silence. So we need to find a way to modulate this. Remember, modulation equals information, so we need a way to put some information into this. Well, let's do it the way they did it first and create a pseudo spark gap transmitter. Alright, let's start out by disconnecting the power. And we'll remove our VCC link. And we will put in les bâtons. Okay. So, we will put the power into one side of les bâtons, and from the output we will connect to our oscillator. Let's see if I can get this all in frame for you here. So as I push the button, we output our carrier frequency. Now we have time modulated our carrier. So if we were listening to that on a radio, you would hear bursts of silence when we key the radio. For instance, it would be like this. Psst, psst, psst. Something along those lines, okay? So you could kind of transmit a Morse code, CW kind of signal doing it that way, but still not really useful. When we talk about a radio, we expect to hear people talking. So let's bump it up a notch and let's modulate some audio into this simple circuit. Alright, so we have our oscillator here. Excuse me. And we'll number these pins like any other IC. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pin 2, we connect to ground. Pin 3, we connect to our aerial, our antenna, our radiator. Now, you always want to have a resonant antenna. Doesn't matter so much for receiving, but it matters very much for transmitting. If your antenna isn't resonant, some of the power that we put into the circuit is going to bounce back, and that's going to create standing waves. And standing waves are bad. Not only do they rob you of power, but they can damage a high-powered transmitter, and yeah, it's just not good. Okay. Now remember, pin 1 is not connected. So the way that we are going to input our modulation is with the transformer. So it's going to look something like this. Pardon my crude drawing skills, but I'm not real good at it. So this side is going to be 1,000 ohm, and the other side is going to be 8 ohm. So it's 1,000 to 8 transformer. We're going to have our audio incoming in here. There's our plus. There's our minus. And right here is going to be our VCC. In this case, it'll be 6.5 volts. Now, who amongst you can guess where the final connection goes? That's right, Timmy. It goes to pin 4, our VCC in. So now, when we put this together, we can actually input some information. We can modulate audio into our circuit. Okay, so it's been about a week since I started working on this video. And I'm having trouble getting things to work the way I want. And I'm pulling my hair out until I realized why. First of all, I scrapped the idea of the 28 megahertz because, like I said, this is so low power, it's probably not going to reach out of my house. And the only receiver I have that can receive in that range is my ham radio, which means it would have to get out to my large antenna, which is way out in the yard. So I just scrapped that idea, and I ordered one of these. I mean, you can see what it says, right? 1,000 kilohertz. That is what it says, right? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I went to public school and all. Let's zoom in here. Nope. That says 10,000 kilohertz. That explains it. My old eyes. I thought it said 1,000 kilohertz or 1 megahertz. No, it says 10,000 kilohertz or 10 megahertz, which is not going to work with an AM/FM radio, which maximum frequency range is about, what, 1.6? Ay caramba. So, anyway, we're not going to be able to do the part which I wanted you to hear it on the radio, but we'll still do the demonstration and the experimentation to show you that it works. We'll just have to do it visually. You'll be able to see it on the old oscilloscope. So, let's hook up here. Wake up, oscilloscope. Alright. So there we are on the scope. And there is our 10 megahertz frequency. Oh, Paul. Paul. I don't know about you sometimes. Which I thought was going to be 1 megahertz. But anyway, so there is our 10 megahertz frequency. And if you look very closely, it's very solid. And if you look at our peak to peak, it's relatively solid. It's not moving much. We'll go with 20 megahertz band limit. There you go. 5.28 volts. So we're pretty rock solid. There's no modulation going on there. Alright, now I've got the function generator hooked up to output a 2 kilohertz sine wave. So here are the function generator leads. Here's a big old speaker. And if I hook this up, we should hear a nice sound, right? There you go. You can see it's hooked up. And if I twirl this, so that will be our audio input. I'll move that off of there. Here is our 1000 ohm to 8 ohm audio transformer. And we'll plug it in here. Like so. I actually need this. So we'll power it up here. And again, if you take a look at the scope, 5.2 volts peak to peak. Now we're going to modulate that voltage. Now take a look. Do you see the difference in the waveform? And look at that modulation going on there. Let's see if I adjust the... Now you can really see it. And if I go to... There's a display button here. Display. And put color grading on. Now you can really see it. Now watch this. I'm going to disconnect our modulation. There's our waveform. Reconnect. Boom. You can really see that modulation in there. And remember what I told you at the beginning. Modulation is information. So there's our antenna. And we are actually outputting that sound, that bzzz sound, at 10 megahertz. So, there you have it. A super simple radio transmitter. I mean, it doesn't really get much more simple than that now, does it? You could replace the function generator with a small powered microphone and pick up and transmit your voice. You could replace it with the output of some sort of musical device and modulate that. But again, be wary of the laws governing radio transmission in your locality. So anyway, I think that's pretty cool. We have made radio. I hope you guys enjoyed this little video. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Feel free to comment, share, and don't forget to subscribe. A big thanks to all my patrons. Big thanks to you guys for watching. That's it. I'm out. Peace.